Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at John chapter 11, verses 1 through 46, the story of the raising of Lazarus. Note that so far we've been going through John chapter 1 all the way up to the present chapter, chapter 11, and we've seen a number of miracles. The first miracle was back in chapter 2, Jesus turning the water into wine. That was a wedding. Now we come to a funeral. This is going to be the last miracle mentioned until we get to the resurrection of Jesus. In John chapter 4, we saw the nobleman's son healed. And remember, Jesus wasn't healing him right there. Instead, the man walked all the way there. Jesus healed him, healed the boy, but he wasn't with Jesus. He was 18 miles away, and the father didn't find out about it until the next day. So it was a long distance healing. And likewise, when we get to the blind man who is told to go wash in the pool of Siloam, John chapter 9, that was also a long distance healing. So notice that we've got two long distance miracles. Then when we come to chapter 5, verse 1, we have the lame man at the pool. Notice the water that's involved. And again, in chapter 6, verse 16, Jesus is walking on the water. So you've got two miracles involving water. And the pivotal one in the middle, John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, the feeding of the 5,000. Now, I'm not saying this has any special meaning. It just makes it easier to remember. And I think maybe that's why these miracles are given in this order. Now, I'm not saying they didn't happen in this order, but it's interesting that you have a certain symmetry to the miracles. And I think that might be just in order. Now, maybe there's some other reason, but it might be just to help us remember them in a very oral society. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick. We're going to find out his name, Lazarus of Bethany. And next we're told the village of Mary and Martha, and her sister Martha. Now, Lazarus, that's the shortened form of Eliezer. God is my helper. And let me just say, Lazarus is going to be helped. And they're in Bethany, this little tiny town. Let's look at that for a second. The town of Bethany, notice you've got Jerusalem here. Now, let me just say this map is oriented where north is a little bit, curved to the right, but that's just so you can get everything into the map. I didn't do this map. This came compliments of someone else. But you can see Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is surrounded on three sides, the south three sides by valleys. So there's the Kidron Valley on the east side, and then the south and west side there's the Hinnom Valley, and these both run together into another valley, and they actually eventually work their way all the way down to the Dead Sea. But then to the east, as you go east from Jerusalem, notice you have the Mount of Olives, and it's got a couple of bridges along the top part of the mountain. But once you cross over the Mount of Olives, first there's this little village of Bethphage, house of figs. The word Beth means house, Bethphage, and then you go a little bit further, and you get to Bethany. So Bethphage is just over the peak, and then Bethany is down a little bit on the lower slopes of the east side of the Mount of Olives. And Lazarus was from Bethany, but it's also the village of Mary and her sister Martha, and they're going to play a part in our story as well. Verse 2, it was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Now, we're going to read about that story in the next chapter, in chapter 12, verse 3. She'll be introduced there, where there's going to be a supper, and remember, there'd already been a story over in Luke where there was a supper with Martha serving and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. Here, she's going to come, spoiler alert, she's going to come and open up a bottle of perfume of pure nard, and she will pour it on, she'll wash the feet, anoint the feet of Jesus, and Judas Iscariot is going to question that action. We'll see that when we get to John chapter 12. Interestingly enough, we have the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, but here I'm looking at Luke in particular, Luke chapter 7, verses 37 through 38, which also tell either the same story or similar story, where there's an unnamed woman. We're not told that it's Mary, even though Mary is introduced later on in the book of Luke, where Mary and Martha, there's a meal there, and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha serving. This woman is described as a sinner. She brings a alabaster vial of perfume. She anoints the feet of Jesus with both her tears and the perfume. And there's somebody there named Simon the Pharisee that makes a statement. Now, the question is, are these two the same event? Well, they do look alike, but there's other things in the New Testament, and in particular the Gospels, that look alike and end up being two different events. For example, I just mentioned a little while ago the feeding of the 5,000. Well, you know that some of the Gospels also talk about the feeding of the 4,000. You think, well, maybe it's like 4,500. Maybe they're splitting the difference. Except that some of the Gospels mention both feedings within the same Gospel account, letting us know it's two different events. Even though it looked alike, it was two different events. That might be the case here. Now, I'm not going to comment on it here. I don't know if it's the same or not. But we're going to continue. Verse 3, so the sisters sent word to him, that is to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Now, later on in the Gospel account of John, we're going to see a number of references to the disciple who Jesus loved. I don't think that that's necessarily Lazarus. We're going to find out that he loved Mary and Martha too, and that he loved other people, probably loved a lot of people. But notice how this is described. He whom you love is sick. I think they're going to get, he's going to understand that's Lazarus. And we're going to be told not just by the sisters, but also by the writer of the gospel account too, that Jesus loves Lazarus. And just so that you know that he's going to do something, he's going to delay going. But he's not doing it because he doesn't care about Lazarus. And that's the point I think that's being made. So they give testimony to his love. We continue, but when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God. Now, there's going to be a death here, but that's not going to be the end of the story. And so it's happening for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. No, notice the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. There's going to be glory to both the Father, but also to the Son. And sometimes bad things happen. We see this in the book of Job, where sometimes bad things happen, not because the person has done anything bad. Indeed, there had been the question back in John chapter 9, verse 3, the man born blind, and the disciples had asked, who sinned that he was born blind? And Jesus had answered, it's neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Same thing here. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and her sister. Notice she's not named here, but she's named early, and she's going to be named later on. And Lazarus. So you've got, he loved them all. Verse 6, so when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer. And you say, well, wait a second, that's not what you would expect to read. Let me just say, back in my younger days, I used to be with the fire department. I did an entire career with Broward County Fire Rescue. My station was the Seaport, and we'd get an emergency call, and I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I didn't go stop, pick up, donuts or dessert or something. We got in our emergency vehicles. Back in my younger years, it was a fire truck. Later on, it was a command vehicle, and we went what we called code 3, lights and sirens. And you don't slow up, you just go to the scene because it's an emergency. And Jesus doesn't do that. He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was, and then after this he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. Now the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. That was in the previous chapters. They were seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Back in chapter 8, verse 59, they had picked up stones to throw at him. Again, in chapter 10, verse 31, they picked up stones again to throw at him. It's almost like they had these stones, do not touch it. These are for Jesus. They had planned on doing this again and again. And so Jerusalem was a dangerous place right now for Jesus to be. Jesus knows it, the disciples know it, and yet he's headed back in that direction. Verse 9, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Now, this idea of the light of the world, back in chapter 9, verse 5, in dealing with the man that was born blind, Jesus had said, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And so if Jesus is the light of the world while he's in the world, and he's in the world right now, in other words, it's day, then hey, it's okay to go. You're not going to stumble. It will be okay. Jesus has it covered. But there's going to come a time where it's going to, can I say it this way? Things are going to get dark. And people are going to be tempted to, in fact, some will stumble. Some will stumble even so as far to run away or to deny that they even know Jesus. That's going to happen. A hint that Jesus is giving of what's to come. And so he is the light, but make sure the light is in you. Verse 11, this he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. Now that's a euphemism. It's a, sometimes we'll say instead of saying he died, we'll say he passed away. He passed on. Those are just more gentle ways of, and the problem is that if you don't realize that it's a euphemism, you can say, well, you mean he passed by here? Which way did he go? Um, Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. And the disciples take his words very literally. And they say to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, then he's going to recover. If he's fallen asleep and you're going to awaken him, well, maybe the best thing isn't to awaken him. I can think of people that I've known that have maybe been ill and sick, and I really didn't want to call or disturb them. Yeah, I want to make sure they're okay, but I didn't want to disturb them because if they're asleep, that might be the best thing for them. Just the other day, our granddaughter was staying with us, and she woke up feeling not so good. And so I said, well, why don't you get to bed early tonight? And she did. And she what I did is I gave her an iPad with like an audiobook, and within about 5 minutes that had put her to sleep. I'm not saying audiobooks always do that, and you've got to choose one that's a little bit boring maybe for that to work. But if you're asleep, that's good. You can do a lot of healing while you're asleep. And the disciple said, well, hey, that's good. If he's fallen asleep, he's going to recover. They're taking his terms, again, very literally. Do you notice when John speaks, even not just in the book of Revelation or in his epistles, but even in the Gospel of John, very often the mistake is to take his words too literally when a figurative or spiritual meaning is intended. Just remember that for the future. Verse 13, now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. They're taking his words literally, and they're wrong by that. It's okay. They're going to be straightened out before we're done. Verse 14, so Jesus then said to them plainly, now we're getting obvious. Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. You see, it's good that Lazarus died. You say, good, it's not pleasant to die. No, but it's going to bring about a good result so that there will be faith on the parts of certain people. And right here, it's faith on the parts of the disciples. And you say, I thought the disciples already believed. They did, but they need to continue to believe. They need to grow in their belief. And not only they, let me just say, I need to grow in my belief. I need to continue to believe. And you do too. And that's why we're reading this. It's written for exactly that purpose. But let's go to him. Verse 16, therefore Thomas. Now I got to say, I love Thomas. First of all, it's my middle name. And maybe a little bit, according to my mother, a little bit of my heritage. One time she made the comment, because she was saying something about some sort of movement. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. I'm a little doubtful that that's legitimate. And she burst out and she says, boy, your middle name, we named you right. And I get that. Thomas, by the way, the name Thomas actually, it's Hebrew, and literally it means twin, who is called Didymus. And whereas Thomas is Hebrew for the word twin, Didymus is Greek and it has the same meaning, twin. So who is this guy's other twin? I don't know. I'm not going to really guess. but he has the name both in Hebrew and in Greek. And he said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go so that we may die with him." Now, let me just say about Thomas, he's high in loyalty. He's ready to die with Jesus, but he's low in faith. And the faith's going to come eventually. So, we'll stick with him because Thomas is going to stick with Jesus. Verse 17, so when Jesus came, he found out that he, that is Lazarus, had already been in the tomb 4 days. Verse 18, now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. The Greek text says that he was 15 stadia. They didn't use miles. They used, I think, the size of a stadium. And make 15 of those. That's probably a little bit under 2 miles, but it's close enough for government work. Um, and because of that, many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary. They had come both from the local town there, the village. They had maybe some come from Bethphage. Some, I think, had come from Jerusalem. And they've gathered around to console them concerning their brother. The Jewish people back then, and even today, they'll have something they call sitting Shiva, and Shiva is just the word for 7. Remember, like the Sabbath, um, and sitting Shiva is the idea where you go and you sit with somebody for, if you're doing it right, for 7 days, and you're not doing it to talk a lot, you're just doing it to be with them and hurt with the hurting. You'll remember the book of Job. The friends of Job come to Job and they sit with him quietly, and nobody speaks for 7 days. And then Job speaks and they speak, and the sort of the story goes downhill from there, let me just say. But here they've come to console them concerning their brother. And so here they are. And Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, and he's not there yet, somehow he's close enough, and somebody brings word that Jesus is nearby in the area, but not there in the village. Martha goes out to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. So Martha's out, Mary stays, and the camera now is going to follow Martha out to go and see Jesus. So let's go with her. Verse 21, Martha then said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, he hadn't been, but if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Now, Mary's going to echo the same thing in just a few minutes. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But Martha's got some faith here, not just that and by the way, I think she's right. Um, I think she's correct because when I look at the ministry of Jesus, every time there was a need, not just in John's gospel, but in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, every time there was a need, Jesus was there to answer it through a miracle. And now sometimes they had to ask for it. Sometimes they had to ask a bit and sort of press the issue. I think of the Canaanite woman, and Jesus pushed back against her, but he still answered her request. But Martha then, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God's going to give you. And I think Martha is showing her faith. She believes that a resurrection can take place. And I think this is a very broad hint about that. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Well, that's good, but Martha says, wait a second. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. After all, she was listening, I'm assuming she was listening, or at least had heard, back in John chapter 6, when Jesus had said, on the last day, there's going to be a resurrection, and many will come from rise from the dead, and so on. That wasn't just a New Testament teaching. That was back in the Old Testament too. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 said very clearly in the end times, in the last times, that many shall rise from the grave, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting contempt. She knows that. She believes that. But she'd like something a little closer to the present. And so she says, I know he's going to rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And so Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Notice the three different references to believing, because this is what Jesus is pressing upon her. Do you believe? And she does, but it's okay. He's pressing her to believe. And I think John, the writer, is pressing you to hear this and believe. He wants you to believe. The question that he asks of her is being asked of you. Do you believe this? Have you come to that place of faith? Now, I also want you to notice just the symmetry of this dialogue. He starts off, I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And notice, shall live, and everyone who does live and who believes in me shall never die. And so this comes as a complete package, that he is the resurrection and life, and if you believe in him, then death is not that thing that's going to take you away. In fact, death becomes a mere transition into a larger life. I love the way C.S. Lewis described the life after death. Actually, he said that's where you really begin to live. Right now are just the shadowlands, he called. This existence is the shadowlands. It's like looking at things in shadow. You don't see all of reality as you will then. That's actually a biblical principle, because we will know even as we are known. Verse 27, she said to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. Now, do you remember how the last chapter ended? Back in chapter 10, there were those who came to Jesus and said, tell us plainly, are you the Christ? And he said, I sort of told you this already. And you didn't get it, that, I'm the Son of God. And here, Martha has put all of that together. You are the Messiah, the Son of God, that those two titles refer to the same person. The ones questioning Jesus hadn't gotten that, but she's gotten that. Even he who comes into the world. You didn't start here, but you came here from a not here place. When she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly. Now you got to catch this, because remember that Jesus is on the most wanted list. And there are those that are out to try to arrest him and bring him before the Jewish authorities. And so she covertly goes to Mary, secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, that is when Mary heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. So, she doesn't really, let me just say, Mary doesn't play poker well. And by that, I mean, she doesn't have the poker face. She doesn't just casually get up and go in the other room and sort of, no, she hears the news and she's up and going. So you've got Martha and you've got Mary, and Martha had taken the initiative initially to go and to meet to meet Jesus. Mary had waited at the house until being summoned now by Martha. In both cases, they're going to ask the same thing. They're going to say, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. That's actually good. And maybe they're saying that because they had said that to each other already in the days leading up to and after the death of Lazarus. In Martha's case, she added that Jesus was still able to raise Lazarus from the dead. Mary, now, if she says that, we're not told. There's no mention in Mary's conversation about the presence ability of Jesus. Not that she necessarily doubts it. Maybe she just doesn't feel the need to drop a casual hint. Verse 30, now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. And so they figured, okay, we're going to the tomb, but instead she goes in I don't know if it's a different direction. Maybe it was in the same direction as the tomb was, but instead she goes to where Jesus is, not to where the tomb is. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet. We're going to see in the next chapter Mary again at the feet of Jesus. So she fell at his feet, saying to him, and here's the words, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That same if was the same thing that Martha had said. Verse 33, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Now they're going to go to the tomb, and it's a time of solemnity, it's a time of weeping. And we read verse 35, shortest verse in the entire Bible, Jesus wept. And that brings up a question: why did Jesus weep if he knows how it's going to end? Well, I think there's several reasons. First of all, because he feels what we feel. I think he was weeping because he felt the emotion of the time, and there was a solidarity of emotion between Mary and the people and the loss and Jesus there. He wept because death is an enemy that separates us from our loved ones. He wept because the cross was still ahead. And I don't think this is just put on. I think he really felt it, and he wept with the ones that weep. Um, there have been times, and I'm not sure if this is a good illustration, but I'm going to do this anyway. There have been times where I have sat and watched a movie, maybe that had a lot of emotional content, and there comes to a time in the movie where something very sad happens, and where I have actually wept with tears, even though, let me just say, even though I've seen the movie before and I know how it ends. And Jesus knows how it's going to end, but he can still feel. And I think the Lord still feels. Now, I think God feels emotions. And I'm not just talking about, the Son, not the Father or the Spirit. I think God feels emotions. Now, it's not that he is uncontrollable. Sometimes emotions can take over and you act in a bad way. I don't think it's that. But I think God created emotions. It's part of us. Can I say it this way? Sort of looking like God. He originated us. He created us in his image, I might add. Now, that doesn't mean we're like him in every respect, but Jesus wept. And not all tears are from evil. And so verse 36, so the Jews were saying, "See how he loved him." But some of them, and notice when you say the Jews here, this isn't necessarily the Jewish leaders. We've used that term a lot to talk about the Jewish leaders. I don't think this part is. This is just let me just say, I think almost everybody there was Jews. Jesus was Jewish, and Lazarus was Jewish, and his family was Jewish, and everybody else. There probably weren't a lot, if any, Gentiles there. So they were saying, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, by the way, the term "loved," when he says, "See how he loved him," ede pos ephile auton, that ephile. Remember how you have some different words for love? Um, can I just point out that they're sort of synonyms, and people want to talk about how agape, that's a special kind of love. It's just a general word for love. And that's not used here. It's phileo that's used here instead. But that doesn't mean it's anything less than. It's the love of relationship. And yes, there's this relationship that Jesus had with Lazarus. He knew him. But some of them, and by the way, that's the imperfect tense. Notice that he had been loving him, not how he loves him now, but how he had been loving him in the past. But let me also add that being loved by Jesus does not negate sickness or death. Sometimes bad things can happen even to somebody that Jesus loves, and he still loves. He still loves us. But notice the Jews were saying this, but some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying? Lord, if you had been here." Again, the same idea that we could have done it different. But Jesus didn't do it different. And when we asked, "Lord, couldn't we have taken another way?" Well, maybe that was the best way. I was thinking about this, not necessarily in context of this verse, but how you have this, or maybe you don't know, because if you live in the old era of typewriters, we had this thing called whiteout, where if you made an error, you could use this little sheet of whiteout stuff and sort of erase your error. And let me just say, I was thinking about this, that it would be cool if we had some whiteout for things that we've done in our lives. I could use a sheet of whiteout for some of the dumb things, and mostly what comes to my mind are some of the dumb things that I've done in life. And I was counting them up, and I lost track after about 5 or 10. Not because I haven't done that many things, but because my memory's not that good. Um, but when it comes down to it, even some of those dumb things that I've done, and I'm not happy with those, but God has brought some good things from quite a few of those, if not all of them. Um, and so, yes, he could have done it a different way, but he didn't. And when you ask, Lord, why did you have to do it that way? Maybe there was a reason that you can't see this side of heaven. And so, notice some looked at the love, others focused on the possibilities. Verse 38, so Jesus again being deeply moved within, and this, that's continuing, came to the tomb. Now, what we're looking at here in the picture is the traditional tomb of Lazarus. I don't know for sure that this is the place. Let me just say, after Lazarus he's going to be raised from the dead. After that, eventually Lazarus is going to die again and maybe be laid in the same tomb. I'm not sure what happened the second time, although I have a feeling. I have a feeling that when it came time for him to die the second time, he said, "Yeah, I've done this before. It's no big deal." Once you've done it, I think maybe it was just easier the second time. One of the more difficult things I did, not physically difficult, but emotionally and mentally difficult, was to step off a 4-story building with only a rope holding on, rappelling down a building. Let me say, it's not physically hard, but boy, that first time was tough. But the second and third and fifth and eighth and 20th time, those were all easy. It's just just watch the first step. And I think maybe the same thing here. And so they come to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against this. This would be sort of an upper class tomb. A lower class would just be a hole in the ground, and they put something over it to make sure the animals don't dig it out and begin desecrating the body. And the practice back then, where you would take the body, you'd wrap it up, so maybe drive out some of the smell, because it will begin to stink after a while. And then you put it in the tomb and you leave it there for a year. And once the body has decomposed, you go back in and collect the bones, and you would put them into a limestone box known as an ossuary. And then you would put the box in the tomb, and you might end up with with a tomb that had 5, 6, 10, 15. And I've seen tombs with a bunch of ossuaries in them. In actually right there on the Mount of Olives. Um, and so maybe that was the practice here. And there might have been other ossuaries in there already. We're not told it was a new tomb, but there was a stone lying against it. Verse 39, Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been dead for 4 days." Well, let me just say, when there's no refrigeration, bodies decompose rather quickly, and she has a legitimate concern. However, Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" The question that he has for her, remember, she had said, "If you were here," Jesus says, "If you believe." We tend to think that, "Show me and then I'll believe." Jesus says it just the opposite way. He says that believing leads to seeing. If you believe, then you will see the glory of God. Verse 41. So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, and what he's going to do, he's going to pray to the Father. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it so that they may believe that you sent me." So he prays. He prays to the Father, and this is a real prayer, a real sincere prayer. But he knows that God, he's like, "You've heard me, and I know that you hear," and there's no question about that. But I'm praying for the benefit of those who were listening in. It reminds me of my mother. She used to sometimes she'd start a conversation with a friend of hers. They'd be on Miami Beach, a lot of big Jewish population, and she was there with a number of her Jewish friends, and she'd start this conversation sometimes in a deli or a restaurant. Is it true that the scriptures speak of a Messiah that would come and that would die and that would rise again from the dead? And they'd have this conversation um, about the Jewish Messiah. Really, it's about Jesus, and both of them believed, but the room would get quiet and people would start listening in to their conversation. And they were having the conversation, yes, between themselves. Yes, it was true. Yes, it was sincere, but it was also so that others could listen in. And and Jesus does the same thing here. But because of the people standing around, I said it so that they may believe that you sent me. So he's praying for their behalf that they can see and hear and believe, so that they can believe who he is and what he has done. Verse 43, when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Now, I've heard preachers say on occasion that he said, Lazarus, come forth, because he didn't want to raise the entire graveyard. And I used to think, well, that's sort of, but that actually might be right. Remember, not just the graveyard, but even the tomb. We're not told that this was a new tomb. It might be that there were other family members from way back that were in this tomb. And Jesus isn't going to raise everybody yet. There's coming a day when he's going to say, come forth, and he won't start with the name Lazarus. And you know what? A whole lot more are going to come forth. There's going to come a day when he calls, and the dead are going to be raised incorruptible. Lazarus, as I said before, he's going to die again. But at that next resurrection, at that final resurrection, there won't be any death after that. And so the men who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings. Now, it's not that they were necessarily tying him up. And his face was wrapped around with a cloth. So notice the wrappings, notice the cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go, because he's all wrapped up. Somebody's going to have to do that. Let me add that when this happens again, when we have a final resurrection, nobody's going to have to untie us. It's going to be a different sort of resurrection body. It won't be limited. It won't be restricted by wrappings or a cloth. But we will rise, and that's going to be you say, what's that going to look like? And my answer is, I don't know, because we're not there yet. It has not yet appeared what we shall be, according to 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. But we'll be like him, like Jesus, because we will see him as he is. Verse 45, therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Some believe, some go tell. There's belief, there's unbelief, and we'll see what happens with the Pharisees and with those who tell. We'll see that next time. But for now, let me just say, it's okay if you tell as long as you believe. Go ahead and tell others. That's fine. In their case, they're doing it maybe out of bad motives. But make sure you don't go away without believing, because it's only as you believe that you will see the power of God at work.